Hello everyone and welcome back to Mysterious Murmurs. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying this video. Story name: The Keeper of Hollow Falls. The sound of wind scraping against the windows was the first thing Mark noticed when he stepped into the old house. The second thing? The eyes, those cold, unmoving eyes staring from the portrait on the wall, just above the fireplace. It was as if they were watching him, waiting for him to do something. He shifted his weight uncomfortably and looked away, only to catch a glimpse of a shadow flickering just out of the corner of his eye. This was it. The house at Hollow Falls. Mark had heard the rumors. Everyone had. Some called it a haunted house, others a cursed one. But Mark wasn't the type to believe in ghost stories. He was a man of logic, a man who knew that everything had an explanation. Hollow Falls had been abandoned for years, but it wasn't the ghosts people feared, it was the keeper. The keeper of Hollow Falls. The legend went that the keeper wasn't quite human, that he watched over the falls, guarding something so terrible that no one dared come near. Those who ventured too close never returned, and those who tried to leave after getting too close were never the same. Some said he was a protector, others, a monster. But whatever he was, one thing was certain: no one survived an encounter with him. Mark had never believed in such nonsense. He had come to Hollow Falls with a different purpose: to uncover the truth. He was a journalist, after all, and every good journalist knew how to separate fact from fiction. But the more he heard about the keeper, the more he found himself wondering if there might be more to the story than just local superstition. The house creaked beneath his feet as he stepped deeper inside, his flashlight cutting through the thick darkness that seemed to linger in every corner. It smelled of mildew and rot, and the walls were covered in peeling wallpaper, faded like old memories. Mark shivered and pulled his jacket tighter around him. "Hello," he called out, his voice echoing through the empty halls. "Anyone here?" There was no answer. Of course, there wasn't. Mark knew that no one had lived in the house for years, not since the last family had disappeared without a trace. The townspeople said the keeper had come for them, and they said it in whispers, as if speaking his name might summon him. Mark laughed to himself, shaking his head. "Not real," he muttered. "Not real." But as he moved deeper into the house, the atmosphere began to change. The air grew colder, heavier. The shadows in the corners seemed to stretch, and every footstep he took echoed with an unnatural intensity. Mark couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. His heart began to race. He turned a corner and found himself in a large, open room. The fireplace was cold, the furniture covered in dust, and yet, something didn't feel right. His flashlight beam flickered for a moment, then went out completely. "Great," he muttered under his breath, fumbling with the flashlight. But when he clicked it again, it lit up, revealing something he hadn't seen before. In the far corner of the room, a large, ornate mirror hung on the wall. It was old, its edges decorated with intricate patterns that seemed to twist and writhe as if alive. But what made Mark freeze in place wasn't the mirror, it was the reflection. It was him, but not quite. The figure in the mirror was a twisted, distorted version of Mark, with hollow eyes and a twisted smile, as though it were mocking him. Mark blinked, and when he looked again, the figure was gone. His breath caught in his throat. It was just a reflection, right? Nothing more than a trick of the light, a figment of his imagination. but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway. Mark's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't alone. He couldn't have been. He was certain no one else was supposed to be here. He turned, panic rising in his chest, but when he reached the door, it slammed shut in front of him with a force that rattled the walls. Mark stumbled backward, his pulse pounding in his ears. The air grew colder still, and Mark could see his breath fogging up in front of him. He turned back toward the room, eyes wide, as the shadows in the corners seemed to grow deeper and darker, stretching out like claws, reaching for him. And then, from the farthest corner of the room, the voice came. Soft at first, like a whisper in the wind. "Leave." Mark spun around, his heart racing. But no one was there. He stared into the darkness, straining to see. His eyes were adjusting, but it didn't matter. The voice came again, louder this time, and it felt as though it was all around him. "Leave or suffer?" Mark felt his blood run cold. There was no way he was imagining this. The keeper. It had to be him. But what was he guarding? And why was Mark still here? Suddenly, the mirror flickered again, and Mark's breath caught in his throat as he saw the reflection once more. But this time, it wasn't just his distorted self. It was something else. Something darker. A shadowy figure, with hollow eyes and an outstretched hand. It moved, stepping out of the frame into the room. Mark stumbled back, his mind racing. He needed to leave. He had to get out of there, but the door wouldn't open. The house had trapped him. A soft laugh echoed from the shadows, chilling him to the bone. The keeper's voice was low, almost purring. "I warned you." Mark's blood ran cold as the figure stepped forward, its hand reaching for him, its eyes burning with an unholy light. And then everything went dark. The darkness swallowed him whole. It was as though the world itself had been erased. There was no sound, no light, no sense of time. Mark couldn't tell if he had been standing, sitting, or lying down. It was all one endless, suffocating void. He tried to scream, but his voice was lost in the emptiness. And then, just as quickly as it had come, the darkness receded, replaced by a dim, flickering light. Mark blinked, his eyes adjusting to the pale glow that surrounded him. He was no longer in the room with the mirror. In fact, he wasn't sure where he was at all. He looked around and saw nothing but a thick, foggy mist that seemed to stretch on forever. The air was thick as if it had weight. He could barely breathe, but somehow he didn't feel as though he could move. It was as if his feet were glued to the ground. "Where am I?" His voice was hoarse, barely audible. From behind him, a low, gravelly voice answered, "You are where you should be." Mark spun around, his heart pounding. The keeper stood there, as if he had been there all along, watching him. His face was still obscured by shadows, but Mark could feel his presence, like a weight pressing down on his chest. The keeper was tall, thin, and cloaked in tattered black robes that seemed to merge with the fog around him. Mark tried to speak, but his words stuck in his throat. He couldn't look away from the keeper's eyes. They were pale, almost milky, and glimmered with an unnatural light. They seemed to see through him, into his very soul. "You're the one they were talking about," Mark whispered, his voice trembling. The keeper didn't respond immediately. He stepped forward, the fog swirling around him as if it were alive, and Mark instinctively took a step back. But there was nowhere to go. The mist closed in on him. "You've come too far." The keeper finally spoke, his voice like gravel scraping against stone. No one ever listens, you know. They never understand until it's too late. Mark's mind was racing, trying to make sense of everything. He had to get out. He had to find a way to escape before this keeper, decided to make him just another forgotten soul trapped in this hellish place. "What do you want from me?" Mark asked, his voice shaking. The keeper's lips curled into a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "I want nothing from you," he said softly. "But you, Mark, you're the one who wanted to know the truth. Now you will know it." The fog thickened, and the temperature seemed to drop even further. Mark's breath came out in shaky clouds, but he was no longer sure if it was the cold or his fear that made him shiver. "The truth," Mark repeated, his mind trying to comprehend the words. "What truth?" The keeper's smile widened. "You think you came here to uncover the mysteries of Hollow Falls? To write your article? To tell the world what happened here? You think you came to expose me?" Mark's eyes widened as a chill crept down his spine. "Who? You're the one who killed them. The family. The others who vanished." The keeper laughed, a low, eerie sound that made the mist ripple. "Killed? I didn't kill them, Mark. I protected them. I am the guardian of Hollow Falls. I have always been here, watching, waiting, keeping the darkness at bay." The fog parted slightly, revealing a figure in the distance. Mark squinted through the haze, but the figure was moving too quickly, too unnaturally fast. It was a blur, a shadow that seemed to stretch and twist, as though it were something not entirely human. The keeper's voice dropped to a whisper. "Do you know what lies beneath the falls, Mark? The thing that calls to you, that calls to everyone who comes here? It's not just a monster. It's not just a legend. It's the thing that keeps the world from breaking apart. The thing that keeps you from being swallowed." Mark's heart began to race. The figure in the distance was getting closer, moving faster now, and Mark felt his legs tremble beneath him. He wanted to run, but the ground beneath him felt like quicksand. He couldn't move. What are you talking about?" Mark gasped. The keeper's face twisted into something far darker than before. "The thing you're trying to uncover, the truth you're searching for, it's not something you can control. It never was." Mark's pulse hammered in his ears. The figure was almost upon him now. He could feel its presence, as if it were just inches away from him. The air was thick, suffocating. "Run," the keeper murmured, his eyes suddenly gleaming with a terrifying intensity. "Run, if you can." The mist swirled violently around Mark, and in that moment, the figure reached him. Everything went black again. When Mark awoke, he was no longer in the mist. He was lying on the cold, hard ground, gasping for air. His head throbbed with pain, and his body felt as though it had been pulled apart and put back together wrong. He sat up, disoriented, trying to make sense of what had happened. The fog was gone, and the house was silent again. But there was something different now, something that sent a shiver up his spine. The house felt alive, as if it were breathing, watching, waiting. Mark scrambled to his feet, his hands shaking. He had to leave. He had to get out of here before whatever it was that had just tried to claim him came back. He turned toward the door, but as he approached, he froze. There, standing in the doorway, was the figure, the keeper. And behind him, in the shadows, was something far worse. If you've enjoyed this journey into the unknown, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments below. Have a tale of your own or a legend you'd like us to explore? Let us know. You might just hear it next. Be sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a story. Because here the darkness is always waiting just for you.